Could Canada splitting from America be a good thing for global order?
Mr. Carney is not simply the new Prime Minister. He is the new Prime Minister in opposition to the President of the United States. Everything we have come to rely upon from our single largest trading partner and ally has been altered.
Just last week, Canada's Parliament narrowly passed Prime Minister Mark Carney's first federal budget. This budget plan is the second largest in the country's history, and it massively increases defense spending. Carney called it generational investment to help Canada. But will it work?
If the international community, the global community, is looking to see if Canada is going to live up to the commitments for our collective security, this budget demonstrates it on the dollars and cents. The money is there.
To find out, in this week's episode, I spoke to Marci Surkes, who worked under Justin Trudeau in the Prime Minister's office. We looked at Canada's attempt to move away from America and what it means for global order.
Mr. Carney's first few months in office have been about how to solidify and disentangle Canada from the United States. These new relationships, these new attempts to look outside of the American sphere, this is a whole new ballgame for us.
Let's go and order the disorder. I'm Jason Pack, and this is Disorder, a show where we search for a semblance of order in our mad, 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 mad world. It's a show where we encourage our listeners to keep their elbows up and where we investigate which nations and individuals have been able to play the role of orderers on the global stage. Disorder is also a show where I love returning to my favorite guests, even hosting them in my own house. So today, to discuss all things Canada and to congratulate the Saskatchewan Roughriders on winning the Grey Cup for the first time since 2013, it is a great pleasure to be rejoined by Marci Surkes. We heard from her back on episode 89, Canada 2025 Stealth Mega Orderer. And now we are checking in with her again to see whether Mark Carney's election has allowed Canada to play that role in leading a coalition of the willing against Trump's tariffs and in favor of coordinated solutions to climate, AI regulation, tax, and disinformation. Marci served as the Executive Director of Policy and Cabinet Affairs in the Prime Minister's Office of Canada from 2019 to 2022. And she currently advises multinational corporations, Canadian businesses, and nonprofits across a range of economic, geopolitical, and social issues, often at the C-suite level via her firm Compass Rose. Marci, we need to pick your brain about all things Canada, but most pressingly, why is the Grey Cup final played in November?
I mean, that is a great place to start, Jason. And I think the reality is that Canadians really like to witness and participate in organized sports outside in the snow. That is inherently part of our culture.
But why is it not in January or February?
Oh, I mean, we're not martyrs. I mean, January or February in Canada, for anyone who has visited for most parts of the country, would be a little beyond the pale. So, we keep it cold, a little icy. That makes it all a lot more interesting, but not too severe.
Is there Canadian football on Canadian Thanksgiving? And why is Canadian Thanksgiving earlier in the year, just like the Canadian Grey Cup is earlier than the Super Bowl?
All comes down to harvesting. So Canada is a northern climate, and we harvest at least a month earlier, if not even 6 weeks earlier, than our American friends. And so Thanksgiving, holiday celebrating the harvest, takes place naturally at the end of the harvest season.
Amazing, amazing. So we love all things football here, all the codes of football. We are going to finally get an Australian up here. We're going to explain the differences between Australian rules football and rugby, but they're quite similar. We know that the CFL has a wider field. It's more pass-oriented. But is the CFL a top sport in Canada, or does the NHL and then MLB really rule the roost? And CFL is kind of like a quirky thing for a niche market.
I don't know if it's a niche market. I think most Canadians rally around the Grey Cup. That is an exciting final game in the season, but it's not as popular as some of the major leagues that play across North America. Canada is through and through a hockey country, and I think will forever be. However, I come from a baseball household, and our Blue Jays made a pretty good run of it, as you'll know, very recently. And a lot of folks who normally tune into hockey were suddenly enamored with the Blue Jays. One Major League Baseball team for a whole country gives you something really, everyone can come together on the Blue Jays.
And it also gives a great simulacrum for geopolitical rivalry, which is now what we're going to be talking about. So Mark Carney, the mega orderer-in-chief, he flipped the script. He won a large majority, and I've had great hopes for him. What I want to start with is, have these hopes been dashed? Because if you're looking at things from a UK perspective, Keir Starmer on July 4th, 2024, wins this huge 80-seat majority. People think there's going to be great growth in the economy, they're going to solve migration, they're going to recalibrate the relationship with the U.S., blah, 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 blah. And, you know, his popularity rating tanked. Within a few months, he was under 20% approval rating. So Carney has not had that happen to him. How have the Canadian public perceived his first few months in office?
So I just want to preface by saying you and I last spoke a year ago, and quite literally in every respect, federal politics in Canada has changed. The only thing that is consistent is that Mr. Carney represents the Liberal Party. He's the leader of the Liberal Party, which was Justin Trudeau's party. So there is continuity.
And also your party.
And my party.
You're coming at this from an insider's perspective, Marci. You have been involved in Liberal Party politics. So how have Carney's first months played out?
So Mr. Carney has fundamentally changed the game. So he is leading the Liberal Party, a party that is the traditional centrist party in the Canadian federal political space. But the Liberal Party has been one of the most successful political parties in the Western world because it has this uncanny ability to find the center, wherever that may be, at any given moment, which means that sometimes, in the case of Mr. Trudeau, 2015, that party hewed center left. With Mr. Carney, it is much more center, even verging on center right. Just to provide some context to listeners, Mr. Carney has come in, become the leader. He is running much more of a center-right government. Some even liken it to more of a progressive conservative government. Socially progressive, but much more fiscally disciplined than perhaps the Liberal Party has been over the last 10 years. But his first few months in office have been fascinating because Mr. Carney is not simply the new prime minister. He is the new prime minister in opposition to the President of the United States. And that is the lens through which the entirety of his tenure to date, including the election, must be viewed. Canadians are in a moment where, and Mr. Carney uses this term all the time, a hinge moment. It is a hinge moment because everything we have come to rely upon from our single largest trading partner and ally has been altered very quickly. So Mr. Carney's first few months in office have been, one, establish a rapport with not just the Trump administration, just with Donald Trump, and two, has been about how to attempt to solidify and disentangle Canada from the United States, diversifying trade routes, being more solid on our own, sustainable on our own. That is what he and his government are consumed with, those two tracks, parallel tracks. To date, Mr. Carney is enjoying a very solid lead in the polls in terms of his own leadership. So he is not in Starmer land. He is running 20 points ahead of his opponent on the conservative benches.
And that's still Poilievre as it was in the election.
It's still Poilievre as it was in the election in terms of preferred prime ministers, so a real position of strength for Mr. Carney. The Liberal Party and the Conservative Party, however, are running neck and neck as parties, and that is almost certainly because we are into I have to do quick math, year 11 of a Liberal government. And historically in Canada, governments change every decade or so. We have a parliamentary system, and the elections come, but 10 years is about right.
Like in the UK, after 14 years of Tory rule, people get tired of it and they want to switch. And what you've pointed out there is that the personality politics and the unification of many streams of Canadian thought, both on social and economic issues, is done in Mr. Carney's person rather than in his party. And I think that that's actually quite healthy. So I want to start with a question from mega ordering listener Joanna from Saskatchewan. She wrote in asking, the Prime Minister has been discussing Canada's need to diversify from the U.S. economy and become more security independent as well. He's just proposed over $81 billion over 5 years to rebuild, rearm, and reinvest in the Canadian Armed Forces. This is really big. I think it's the biggest infusion of funding since the Korean War. Is this going to happen? And if so, what will be concretely accomplished?
Well, first of all, hi, Joanna, and congrats on the Riders' win at the Grey Cup. I'm sure everyone's feeling pretty good about that. This is the ultimate question, actually, in terms of what is going to be accomplished. Joanna is referring to a federal budget that the government actually just passed this past Monday evening in the Commons. It was a very close vote, and it was a bit precarious. We did not know for sure if the budget would carry, and that is because it's important for our listeners who are not in Canada to understand the Mr. Carney formed government in the spring.
It's a minority
government. It's a minority parliament. It is about as close as you can get to a majority. The magic number for votes for the Liberals to safely pass any legislation or any appropriations is 2. They need 2 votes. So it is really, really tight.
And if I could interject, fascinatingly, in the Canadian sense, if they had not passed this budget, there would have been new elections and the government would collapse. So it was a very existential moment. And he's made an alliance with both some Greens and then some people who are more conservative than him. And that's very impressive, right?
It is very impressive. I mean, this is the ultimate dance in a parliamentary democracy. You have to be able to dance with multiple partners, particularly when the votes are this close. So Mr. Carney has demonstrated here in this instance that with this budget, which I'll turn to in a second, he actually is able to find partners across the aisle. And unlike his predecessor, Mr. Trudeau, who actually formed a pact, so to speak, not a formal coalition, but an alliance with another party to assure passage in the Commons in a minority parliament under Trudeau, Mr. Carney has made no such pact. He stared down the opposition, almost daring them, if you will, to force an election 6 months after the last one. And he said, I will work with whoever is prepared to be a practical partner and understand that at this moment, Canada cannot afford to have more confusion or uncertainty. This is a moment where we need certainty as a government to make the investments that business needs, to make the investments that Canadians want to see in our security and our stability. So he really dared the opposition on this one. It was quite a game of chicken. Mr. Carney prevailed. The government lives to fight another day. In terms of Joanna's question, in this budget, one of the things that is remarkable, and there was some chatter that Mr. Carney has done the opposite of what most politicians do, recognizing he is not a career politician. He was quite recently the governor of the Bank of England. He comes from a finance technocrat background. Most politicians, the name of the game is to manage expectations, to underpromise and overdeliver. Mr. Carney has done quite the opposite. He is actually promising the moon and the sun and the moon and the stars, and he's not been mitigating that very much. So there was a lot of commentary leading into the budget that perhaps Mr. Carney had set expectations too high, and can he deliver? And I think that's the core or the crux of Joanna's question. Can he deliver? Is this actually a generational, transformational, visionary budget and plan? Look, there's no definitive answer on that point, but in one regard, and there were massive, massive investments in critical infrastructure, major projects, all kinds of items that are big ticket items, but in one respect, and that is with respect to defense and security, this budget is unquestionably a generational commitment. The commitments that have been made to NATO are being actualized through this budget, and Canadians have not seen this form of investment in terms of dollars. It is maybe Korea. It's maybe even, if you were to do a dollar of the day accounting, it's probably more akin to what was spent in the Second World War. And Canadians have not experienced this. And I actually don't believe that Canadians have yet internalized or processed what this level of defense spending means in terms of programs and services from the federal government. You cannot be all of the things all of the time. The government of Canada, prints money, but to a point, there is going to be some restraint that is going to be exercised. And Mr. Carney said this would be a budget that was both an investment budget and a budget of restraint. it is heavier on the spending side than the restraint side, particularly in defense. Proof will be in the pudding. So, we can come to that in terms of what this money actually means in terms of security. But if the international community, the global community is looking to see if Canada is going to live up to the commitments for our collective security, this budget demonstrates it on the dollars and cents. The money is there.
I think there are so many lessons to draw out here, Marci. One is that centrist leadership doesn't have to be boring. It can be transformational, and that's an important lesson for Keir. Keir has frequently felt himself constrained by the politics of what is possible. And if you constantly triangulate what is possible, very little becomes possible and very little can happen. So let's take that as lesson one that we will return to in the Ordering the Disorder. And then lesson two is about physical security and energy security. I'd like to ask you a little bit about energy security. Canada has been a leader in the production and export of energy from shale, from natural gas. I only learned recently about the importance of Canadian nuclear. Can do. So there is an opportunity now, as Trump has frayed a range of alliances due to the tariffs and other things, for Canada to have new forms of export alliances with energy. Let's talk about nuclear and can do, and then I wanted to leave this for later, but it's too good. We have to talk about this pipeline and the rift between Alberta and British Columbia over a new pipeline.
Look, so let's start with the top, the facts. Canada is blessed with natural resources, and it is, as much as we like to fancy ourselves an information and technology center and hub, a place of skills and excellence, at the heart of the beating heart of our economy continues to be our natural resources. That has always been the case. That probably will always be the case. So we have the full range and gamut. Mr. Carney speaks about Canada as a potential energy superpower. It is a potential energy superpower. But there are a number of factors that have led to that potential not being fully actualized. And I'll speak to that. But in terms of what we have, you're quite right, Jason. We have nuclear, we have shale, we have natural gas, we have onshore, we have offshore. We have traditional forms of energy too that people don't like to put front and center in terms of oil and gas industry in Alberta, particularly northern Alberta, in a place around Fort McMurray that is oil country predominantly, and those oil exports are some of Canada's leading exports. That's the truth. And we think of Canada as a social welfare nation, a place with a social security net. Our healthcare and many of our public resources are actually funded by...
Oh, of course, and this is similar to Norway. You have to think of Norway and Canada as being quite similar. Yes. These are wealthy societies that, because they have natural resource wealth, have been able to fund generous social programs.
Exactly right, and that sometimes gets swept under the rug. But we do have to look at the full range, and obviously Canada.
And I need to interject. If Thatcher hadn't given it all away with tax cuts, Britain could be quite similar to Norway and Canada, maybe specifically in Scotland, but there was a moment of also great natural resource wealth and the ability to harness that for social programs. So I was saying that there are some lessons that Carney can give to Keir. There are definitely lessons about how to use windfalls that I think we can make an important contrast.
Absolutely. To your question, particularly on nuclear, again, we have the full menu. We are truly blessed. Nuclear is a form of energy that Canada was deeply invested in 30, 40 years ago. And as you will know, it kind of went out of vogue for a number of reasons. Inability.
Did it go out of vogue in Canada as well?
Yes, it did. I mean,
there are some societies like France where it really never went out of vogue.
Fair.
So I was thinking maybe the Quebec connection might have kept it in vogue.
No, I mean, not really. I would not say it's been a centerpiece of the conversation, the dialogue, and that may very well be because of, in large part, because of how successful the oil sands have been in Alberta,
yes,
and how dominant that has been in terms of a reliable source a reliable source of revenue for federal and provincial governments. And so nuclear kind of fell out of fashion. I think, look, largely due to some major international incidents.
3 Mile Island and a whole range of other things that had blowback on the sector globally.
Precisely. And Canada was actually not immune from that. But there has been a refocusing on nuclear in Canada for the ability for sustainability and green extraction and processes. It is now highly valued commodity that the government is clearly taking an active interest in. There are private sector proponents. CANDU is the federal nuclear agency and program. There are investments, as I said, from the federal government, but there are more private players in the space that the government is incentivizing to go big on nuclear. But it's not just nuclear. It truly is, Jason, across the board. I have never seen this much interest in our energy sector, period.
And this has huge geopolitical consequences. What I want to point out is that we were speaking about investment in the armed forces. And fascinatingly, although there is money to be made in defense widgets and aircrafts, and there's money to be made in exporting oil, these are strategic sectors. So as we are speaking, Prime Minister Carney is on his way to the Emirates, and it is relationships in the spheres of energy and defense which are so critical when you want to have a top-tier relationship with Saudi, with the UAE, with other players. And am I going too far ahead of myself in thinking that some of these moves could take Canada closer to a position like the UK and France, whereby the UK and France can cultivate independent policies towards Saudi, the UAE, Qatar, Turkey, because they sell them arms and then they take hundreds of billions of investment from them into their financial sectors and have those sovereign wealth funds have headquarters there, and that London is very unique in its ability because it has a full spectrum of using British business as part of Britain's geopolitical position in the world. Canada has mostly not done that at the level of a UK or France. It's been closer to a Spain or Italy, I would say. Are we maybe seeing a change in the ability to use Canadian excellence, also Canadian ability to have a balanced budget and some money left over to take it to that level?
Canada has spent the past 40 years focused entirely on its partnership and relationship with the United States, to the exclusion of all other possibilities. In spite of what we talked about last year leading into a G7 year, and Canada has really taken a position of pride in multilateralism and in these international fora. But really, when it comes down to business and bilateral business relationships, it has been the U.S. so far ahead of everyone else. So I'm not sure, Jason, if this is a moment where we are attempting to be closer to the UK in terms of these relationships. I think we are starting from so far back in terms of cultivating these partnerships in other parts of the world that all Carney is trying to do right now is level set and go out there and say to leaders in other nations, hey, we're not solely focused anymore. We see you. We see the opportunity, and we want you to see us separate from the big guys down south. So it's just like baby steps at this point. But to your point, we haven't had a prime minister in the Emirates since '83, so we're more than 40 years. And that was also a moment in time where energy politics were at the center of the conversation. So it is not surprising that we're over there right now. Energy is at the center of that conversation. But I really think Canada is, like I said, it's quite nascent. These new relationships, these new attempts to look outside of the American sphere, this is a whole new ballgame for us.
And like someone who's been in an unhealthy relationship and then gets a divorce, you don't want to fall into bed with the next person that you meet. It might be nice to play the field, keep your options open, go to a little bit of polyamory. So it makes absolute sense to not just bounce out of this and be like, oh, it's the Commonwealth. The only thing that we really want is to just go back to the Canadian-UK relationship, or, oh, we just want to be in the European Space Agency. It makes complete sense to play the field, and that is a rational approach. As Marci and I know very well, the U.S.-Canadian trade relationship is larger than the U.S.'s trade with Germany, France, the UK, and Spain put together. We are talking about billions upon billions, something that creates hundreds of thousands, if not millions of jobs. This is not a joke, this trade war. People are seeing their daily goods more expensive, the cost of living crisis magnified for people, and the ability to have a world which is in recession or not hinges upon these kind of questions. So would you tell us, where are we at in this? And is it true that, given the fact that hundreds of thousands of people's livelihoods depends on this, that Trump, because he didn't like an advert that the government of Ontario was running featuring a news clip of Ronald Reagan giving a briefing in the 80s about why tariffs are not good, did he become punitive because he didn't like an ad? Where are we at in this?
Truth is stranger than fiction, isn't it? So here's where we're at. The Canada-U.S. trade war is no joke. It is full swing and full bore, and quite right. It is beginning to impact people in a very real and dramatic way. Canada has largely been shielded from the tariffs by the continued existence of, as the Americans call, the USMCA. In Canada, we call the CUSMA, which is
everything isn't about branding in this world.
Everything is about branding, but that is the tripartite North American free trade agreement that does also include Mexico. We cannot forget that. But that trade pact is in force until 2026. So that renegotiation is just around the corner. And as I said, because of the continued existence and enforcement of that agreement, most Canadian...
They can't really tariff goods, even though he claims the national emergency about fentanyl.
Correct.
But that doesn't really work?
It doesn't really work. So most goods are exempt. However, there are goods that are not. And that is where the pain points are right now. The highest profile ones, lumber, forestry, ongoing, long-standing differences and views on that industry between Canada and the United States, aluminum, steel, and autos. And for the heartland of Canadian manufacturing, southwestern Ontario, autos have a massive impact on the economy. You should know, and I think we talked about this last time, there are statistics that point to between really like Detroit and southwestern Ontario that parts and goods that go into the assembly of vehicles, commercial and personal vehicles, between those two jurisdictions, sometimes those parts travel across the border up to 10 times. So this is a truly integrated supply chain.
And in normal times, that's not a weakness, it's a strength.
In normal times, it has been a strength. The entire industry has been shaped around this integration. That integration has become disintegration, and the tariffs here have led to the closures of auto plants in Canada. This is impacting...
It's already happened.
It's already happened. So this is impacting hundreds, thousands of skilled laborers in, like I said, heartland manufacturing in the central province of Ontario. So that is real. Steel and aluminum. Steel is also primarily an Ontario-based industry. Aluminum is mostly in Quebec. People are hurting, communities are hurting, and there is no relief in sight. It is important for listeners to know Mr. Carney, immediately upon forming government, began engaging with the president. Their rapport appeared to be an improvement.
And I want to jump in here and say there was every reason to imagine that these two men would not get along well, because Carney ran on the elbows up, I'm going to confront America, we're not going to take it anymore. But it turns out that Trump is such a bully that he despises people who don't fight back. And he's mostly despised European leaders who's caved to him. And he's like, well, great, then I want to hurt you even more. But because Carney is like, well, we're actually not going to change this policy. We're going to stand. that there is some grudging respect, is there not, between the two men?
There was some grudging respect, and I think also, like, Mr. Carney represents a lot of things that Donald Trump fancies, including being part of British society, understanding the financial sectors, those kinds of things. All the things that Donald wants to be, Mark Carney embodies in some respect. So he did respect him, so to speak. 2 appearances in the Oval. The nation held its collective breath to see the outcome of it. You know, would he face the Zelensky type of treatment in the Oval? He did not. It was quite amicable.
Right, probably because Trump would have realized that if you have a native English speaker who actually knows something and you try to treat him that way, you might find a barb back that you don't expect, and he would look bad on TV.
Quite possibly. In any event, there was some reason for hope. We actually felt hopeful in the last number of months that Mr. Carney was going to successfully negotiate some relief on the real tariff hit sectors. This was not going to be an across-the-board agreement, but there were some glimmers of light. The government was hinting, and in fact was probably too definitive in sort of
because it didn't happen.
Because in stating it would happen, and then it didn't happen, and then leading up to this point that you spoke about in the intro to this question, the government of Ontario, where again many of these hard-hit sectors are located, and there is a very populist premier, sort of like the governor of Ontario, named Doug Ford, and he has taken more than an elbows-up approach. Doug Ford has actually styled himself as Captain Canada. This is a subnational leader. The prime minister, is trying to negotiate.
However, worth pointing out that Ontario is the most populous state with the largest economy.
Yes.
In Canada, so although he is a subnational leader, he's Gavin Newsom style in that he has actual heft, and he has a right to, in his own way, try to steer the fortunes of the nation.
To some degree. I think in Canada, this is always the underpinning of the dialogue within the Federation, is who speaks for the Federation. So in this instance, you have the national leader actually engaged in some form of negotiation, a unusual, bizarre form of negotiation, unlike any we've ever seen in terms of international trade negotiations. However, we'll park that. But he is engaged in that dialogue with the Trump administration. And then here comes Doug Ford, and he runs an ad. He's appearing on CNN regularly. He is really going at Trump from every direction. And they run an ad, quite right, which actually used Ronald Reagan as the spokesperson for why a tariff agenda makes no sense for working Americans.
And by the way, I think it is a great speech. And when you see the ad spot, I think we'll try to put a link in the show notes. It's only like a 20-second ad. But when you see it, it shows you that these issues have been understood from an economic perspective from Adam Smith and Ricardo until the present. So nothing has changed.
The ad ran on US TV. Trump paid attention to it, initially brushed it off, but came back with a vengeance about 48 hours later when the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library sort of got into the mix and said that was not, in fact, what President Reagan had intended. I think it might have been what he intended, but
the thing is, when it's a full clip of a live speech, which is unedited, it's pretty tough to say that it was not what was intended. And unlike reading the Bible, where sometimes from the King James edition to now, the meaning of the words have changed, so that if you would go back to the original Koine Greek or Hebrew, you would have a different translation. Ronald Reagan, when he used the word tariff and spend, he meant tariff and spend. When he used the word jobs, it means jobs.
Sometimes the truth really hurts, doesn't it? And so the ad was effective, is really what it comes down to. So effective that after a couple of days and realizing that it was effective and that it was potentially compromising Mr. Trump's narrative, potentially compromising his narrative in front of the Supreme Court, for example, he decided to light everyone on fire. And in the meantime, there is no there in terms of a negotiation between Canada and the United States. That conversation has gone cold. We don't know when it will come back into the fore, or if right now.
So is there a game of chicken going on that you want to see? Each side is like, well, who's going to cave first, or how do you read it?
I would say right now, from a Canadian perspective, it is. I don't know that it's a game of chicken, but I think the strategy right now is let's take a step back, let's recalibrate, let us Let us strategize about how we are going to approach the big deal, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement renegotiation beginning in 2026. Let's focus on that.
Because that's comprehensive, whereas
That's
anything that would be done
comprehensive.
now would be piecemeal.
And so in terms of the piecemeal approach right now, the government is simply going to be underwriting and subsidizing the sectors that are most vulnerable and most hurting, and doing what we spoke about before, really trying to play this longer game of diversification strategy, self-sustaining economic growth and productivity within our own borders. So they have retreated. The government of Canada has retreated and really is attempting to pivot and find its next moves. But right now, active conversation with the United States is not on.
Yeah, sad to hear, but it's very difficult to have a quick win when you have such an intransigent and thin-skinned opponent. But there may be a retreat in those negotiations, but there's really an expansion when it comes to international partnerships. We mentioned CANDU, the nuclear reactor sector. Now, I want to zoom out a little because we're interested in Canada from a perspective of global ordering and coalitions of orderers. I fantasize, and I understand that this is a fantasy, that rather than that embarrassing Oval Office meeting where all the European leaders were treated like school children, and Maloney is like raising her hand, "Can I speak, Sir Donald?" And then Keir is like not even allowed to participate in the meeting, that there would be a meeting on an equal table, and the G6, meaning the others, would be facing off against Trump, and Carney would be their spokesperson. That is my fantasy. Because of the English language, because of the large preponderance of Canadian trade with the U.S. relative to the other G6, that there would be this opportunity. Has that happened at all? Is he able to lead European policy towards the tariffs? Does he have any followers? Can we speak of Australia or New Zealand as actually following a Carney approach?
Well, let's look at a couple of very recent experiences in multilateral conversations, not the one you alluded to in the White House, but let's look at the G7 foreign ministers meeting just took place last week in Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada. And coming out of that meeting, the foreign minister made a few remarks, the Canadian foreign minister, Anand, she made a few remarks that I thought were quite striking. Most notably, speaking about Canada as a leader in that forum. And she said, I'm paraphrasing, but she said something to the effect of, when Canada leads with principled democracy and diplomacy, others follow. This should be such an obvious statement, Jason. Like, this should be Captain Obvious. Of course, this is what we believe in a forum such as this. And yet it needed to be said out loud. I think that underscores precisely the perilous moment we find ourselves in, but also that Canada is not deviating from that tradition. So can Canada step up and be that voice in the world? We've talked about this before. It's tough when our economy is relatively smaller than most of our other traditional allies. But to your point...
But not that much smaller. I think
yes.
It's really important to point out, because people don't need to know these things, the Canadian economy is about half that of the German economy. So we're talking at the Italy, Russia level. These are not small countries. These are countries with much larger populations than Canada.
Correct.
And the per capita GNP is very high.
Yes, so quite right. The natural advantage that Canada has here, I think, are twofold. The first is the longstanding integration with the United States, which can be a vulnerability, but certainly also means we speak common language. We do have levers. We have resources that they need, whether they are willing to admit that right now or not. So there is some favorable opportunity.
But back to the leaders' followers. Are the Europeans or the Australians following? Is Carney a mega orderer leading a coalition, or it's not that simple?
I think Carney could be. He has held precisely one G7 meeting. Mr. Trump showed up, was disruptive, left early. We knew that if he showed up at all, he would dominate in that way, unfortunately. But I think Mr. Carney is just finding his footing. Can the others follow? Absolutely. Will there be natural alliances with the traditional? I mean, Mr. Carney, He became prime minister within a week. He went on a mission to visit the founding nations and peoples of Canada. He came to the United Kingdom, he went to France, and then he went up to the north, to northern Canada, and met with the Inuit leadership.
Like in Nunavut or whatever.
In Nunavut, the founding peoples of Canada. And that was actually, it's not just symbolic. It was actually quite a revealing moment, I think, about Mr. Carney's respect and deference to the nation. And he is going to have to build on that as we go. He has some natural advantages. Canada has no enemies.
You might argue China and Russia,
but within our, certainly, but within no natural enemies within,
for sure,
within our groupings.
Yeah.
And so it can be a natural convener and interlocutor, and I hope leader. I do hope that for Mr. Carney. I think it's early days, and he's just establishing those relationships. But I feel cautiously optimistic about his ability to lead.
Amazing. Of course, all of these things are going to play out on a longer timeline, and we'll have to find out the answer later. Marci, this has been such a pleasure to have you back on the Disorder podcast. I would like your help in ordering the disorder. I want to ask you, for a small win, would it be useful if we took all of the Labour Party, all of their frontbench MPs, and you tossed them up in Scotland for a week and just said, you guys have this crisis. The Reeves budget hasn't worked out. Rayner had to get canned. Lammy has the this, they have the that. Go hang out in Aberdeen, or maybe that's not even the most beautiful place. Go hang out in a castle in Inverness for a week. Get your fucking shit together, because you've got to govern this country for 3 more years. How have the Liberals used retreats? How have they aligned on longer-term strategies rather than the fractious internecine nonsense that seems to have defined UK politics?
I think there is a lesson to be derived from what is happening in the UK right now for Mr. Carney, and he is early enough in his tenure that if he were to actually apply those lessons and recognize that there needs to be a central organizing tenet to governing, and to bring his cabinet together in a manner that is coordinated and where there is a raison d'etre, then having this kind of gathering actually matters quite a lot. I won't speak too much more about UK politics. That's your job, not mine. But in this case, what we are seeing is, first and foremost, Mr. Carney has, as we've discussed, a defining generational crisis to manage with respect to Canada's relationship with the United States. That alone gives the government some form of direction in terms of its organizing principles and what it is going to prioritize. Mr. Carney, it should be noted, has changed the nomenclature in a very interesting way. Mr. Trudeau held cabinet retreats. Mr. Carney has now held one, but he dubbed it a cabinet planning meeting. Plans and priorities, things of that nature. Much more of a business setting. And
the budget, we've learned, the Canadian budget comes out in like a glossy thing. And in the past, Trudeau had pictures of smiling kids and families. And Carney had a picture of this big icebreaker ship that the Canadians are famous for. And this shows a hard-nosed kind of approach. There was nothing warm and fuzzy about the icebreaker, that's for sure. So there is a real shift in tone, branding, and messaging. Again, even just having your gathering of ministers be much more like a business retreat than a government or political retreat sends a message. He is making it very clear to Canadians 2 things. First, that he is trying to distance himself from the Trudeau legacy. That has been very clear and deliberate in all of the political marketing. And second, that he is a serious person. And well, there's no doubt about that. Right. And that's what's coming across. And again, that's his real selling point from a political perspective. I want to point out for people who don't follow Canadian politics so closely, part of my man crush on Mark Carney is a certain kind of seriousness. Trudeau was very good looking. He's a great communicator, but from his scandal about blackface to his, relationship with his father, there's a kind of Nepo baby aspect, and he didn't earn his way up in the way Mark Carney, from his graduate school days to his job at Goldman Sachs to the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. This is a serious person who has put one foot in front of the other, got to this position, earned his money, gotten his chops, and I think that focus on serious branding, whether it's showcasing the icebreaker or not, is an interesting lesson. Because if we go back to Kamala Harris, people forget this now, there was the moment after she took over the presidential campaign where she talked about the brat summer. And people were wondering, what is a brat summer? And it's like, oh, it's fun, and she's smiley, and she's just happy, and, women hanging out, and, people were hurting in the economy, and she's seen as an out-of-touch liberal elite, and that flopped. And I think that this approach, and unfortunately, Mark Carney has certain advantages by being white and a man in terms of how some people will perceive him, and we can't get around that. We have to reference that just does help in those perceptions. But the very nature of his career has led to him being able to have serious credentials in ways that people can connect to.
He is white, he is privileged, he is male, he is all of those things. He has also demonstrated incredible ability and uncanny ability to work hard and achieve, and I think that is being recognized by Canadians. Look, in terms of what people want right now, that is what people want. This is a moment of great fear and uncertainty in the world. They are looking for certainty in their leadership. He does embody that sure-footedness that Canadians were seeking following Mr. Trudeau, and certainly in opposition to what we see in terms of dysfunction in the United States.
I've really enjoyed talking with you, and I think you've given the listeners some insights into how Canadian politics works and its strengths. I'd like to ask you, how do you see things in Canadian politics in 5 or 10 years? More consolidation, fragmentation, a stronger Canadian economy, and a more defined place in the world? Like if we look at Norway, obviously a much smaller country, the role of the Sovereign Wealth Fund and of Norwegian energy exports. The Norwegians, when they go abroad, they know, hey, we've got the Nobel Peace Prize. We are really good at track-through diplomacy. In other words, they don't even try to do normal stuff. They're like, bring them to Oslo and let these Sudanese civil society figures negotiate. They're really good at understanding what their USPs are. Right. Do you see Canada in 5 or 10 years that has become more clear about its place in the world?
I think there are 2 storylines to watch. The first is, if Canada is successful, it will be measured against what is accomplished in the next 18 months in terms of our own physical infrastructure, critical infrastructure, our ability to modernize and get goods to market outside of North America. That is issue number 1, and it is pressing and remains to be seen if we'll succeed. The second issue is the defense piece that we talked about, and whether those investments turn into procurement and the ability for Canadian Armed Forces to actually effectively defend our territory and our sovereignty. Number 3, which is a domestic matter, but you cannot lose this piece, and it harkens back to what I was speaking about in terms of regional disparity and division. There are 2 parts of Canada that have always felt a bit more on the outs. The first is the province of Quebec, the French-speaking province in central Canada, and the second is, I'm going to say the West, but what I mean by the West is the Prairie, primarily Alberta, which is our conventional energy superpower. Both of those populations over decades have felt alienated from Ottawa, from the federal government. In Quebec right now, we are on the precipice of a provincial election where there is a possibility that a separatist government will be elected for the first time in a generation.
Fascinating.
In the West, the Alberta premier that we spoke about, Danielle Smith, has been playing footsie with people who talk about Alberta separation. Very complicated matters. We are talking about 2 landlocked provinces trying to go their own way in the midst of what we are experiencing of global geopolitical reordering. You cannot lose the plot on those 2 storylines, because Canada is only as strong as it is, and we only will be able to lead if we are united. If there is more fragmentation internally.
And in fact, all we have to do is look at the EU referendum here and the Scottish referendum. If Scotland had separated, Britain's ability to do what it does in NATO and other things internationally would be weakened. And since Britain has left the EU, rather than being stronger or a Singapore on the Thames or any of that nonsense, we see that the British are not able to have a strong foreign policy towards Libya and Egypt. They're not able to play a role in Gaza in the way that they might have wanted to. Yes, Jonathan Powell does this and that, and he's a great guy and all of that, but Britain is not punching at the level because stronger together is the maxim of our day. Less parting shot, if you could extrapolate one lesson from how you've seen Canada change in this very important pivotal year 2025 and give it as a lesson to other medium powers, thinking that you were speaking to foreign ministers or internal politicians in Germany and France and maybe smaller places like Sweden or Belgium. What's the lesson that you would like to tell them?
Let's not be nostalgic for a post-war period that no longer exists, but let's take the best of what has created global order, the rule of law, democracy. Let's double down on the principles that have united and not divided us, that have made us wealthy and privileged and powerful in the world for as long as we have been, because the forces of evil want us to be everything but who we have been. And we cannot let them win. We just cannot.
So inspirational. The only way to order the disorder is to look forward, not backward. And if we're going to draw inspiration, it's from the values that we have shared with the past and that we still have. But the only way to march is forward. And I hope as we march forward into that future, we will be seeing you again next year with this little touch-in on what's shaking in Canada. Thank you.
I'd love that. Thank you, Jason.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider joining the Mega Orderers Club via the link in the show notes. That would give you the episode early and the ability to listen to it ad-free. Also in the show notes, you'll find information about our Substack, where we put articles like things Marci has written about Canada. All of those information are in the Substack and in the show notes. As always, our producer has been the one, the only, the George McDonagh. Disorder is co-produced with Evergreen Podcasts. And I am wishing you an orderly week.